We have a number of challenges, you and I. I speak American, we're doing this in English, and my topic over the past week has gone from being relatively disturbing to a complete political disaster. So, what I want to do first of all, just to ensure that we're generally on the same page, is introduce a meme that has been popular, at least in my Facebook feeds and across the American landscape, which is no ban, no wall. Yep. And I want to actually have you, now you've got some energy after eating a little, to say it with me. So I'm going to insist so that at least we have this basis of understanding that we're all generally on the same page. Otherwise, I'm going to have a heart attack talking about walls this week at this moment, being an American. So, no ban, no wall. Ready? No ban, no wall. And now, as if you're 200 people. No ban, no wall. Thank you. In this way, we start off with an understanding that we are all generally on the same side of this discussion, which allows us the space maybe to talk about the original premise of my talk, which predates the politics of this week, which is to look at walls. In fact, I've got the first slide. This, the naivety of walls before we were all talking about Trump's walls. This it seems sweet now. But my premise, or the reason for this talk, is to look at walls or systems to understand that if we look at the boundary between things, the inside and the outside, and we understand these interfaces, that's often where the action is. And in setting up your systems, in setting up your businesses or optimizing your strategies, if you're looking at where the system boundaries are, you can often gain a lot of understanding. If I start going too fast, which I do also for English speakers, just yell out, no ban, no wall. Everybody? From the back, do it, because I will start talking too fast. I get excited and I talk too fast. I'm sorry in advance. I'm going to try to use as few words as possible. So, we have this topic. We're looking at solid physical walls to start with. This is an example of the kind of walls that we'll get to, yeah? Everything has walls. We're going to talk about these physical stone walls, but here, even in our premise of thinking outside the box, there's walls there, yeah? There's the inside, there's the outside. The wall is what defines that your thinking is actually outside of the box. If you move the walls, all of a sudden your thinking is inside the box, yeah? So this wall becomes this very important part of the system. It's often where the action is. This is the physical wall of Geneva. Geneva is a city of peace, but they had for a long time neighbors who were attacking them. It was the French. And they built a wall, a physical stone wall. The reason I mention this particular city wall is because of an interesting thing that they did when they built the wall. When they built the wall, this giant stone thing, physical wall, they destroyed everything outside of the wall. They got rid of, there was architecture, there was culture. They destroyed it so that there was complete clarity. Inside, we're safe. Outside, you're on your own. This is important to me because it gives this physical picture of the wall as a boundary between safe and unsafe. There's a lot of discussion this week in our political discussion around this concept of safety and fear, and also in the premise of smart walls versus stupid walls. The Pope has talked extensively about the fear that comes from walls, how walls divide us. Elizabeth Warren, who is my senator and also my hero, has just declared that there are simply stupid walls. Yeah? These two concepts, that fear is at the boundary of these walls, or that fear and walls are very linked to each other, and also that there are such thing as stupid walls. For example, our no ban, no wall. Yeah? Here is a wall where at least it's not quite stupid. It's got the intention of being safe. In fact, you see in the corner, there's angels. People feel good, they feel safe when they've made this wall, they're inside this wall, they know that they're safe, they can keep their valuables and their loved ones safe. And it's not stupid, because you can see exactly where the boundary is, and you know whether you're inside the wall or outside the wall. You know where you're safe. That's important for our next example, which gets a little bit into the theoretical. Now, it happens that this example happens within the physical walls of Geneva, but the physical walls don't matter. Inside of this circle, there's a bank. The bank had a firewall. Is a firewall a phrase that translates as the digital wall that keeps your data safe? Maybe it's the same word, firewall, firewall, I don't know. So there's a firewall in the bank. They got hacked in the particular type of hack, which was it's called ransomware. It's essentially a kidnapping of data. So somebody gets your data, and they say, I'll give you your data back when you pay me the ransom, yeah? And then you get your data back. This bank was ransomed for less than the cost of any one of the banker's watches. Yeah, a very small amount, relatively. But they said no. And they said no for an interesting reason, because they said all of the data that was kidnapped was outside of our firewall. Therefore, we're not protecting that data. The problem was that lots of their customers, and the hackers proved this, lots of their customers didn't understand that they were outside of the firewall. They had provided private information to their bank, thinking they were safe, and then it turns out they were outside. I've just declared that a wall. They were outside the firewall. But they didn't know, yeah? This is interesting then if you think back to the Geneva wall, the original physical solid wall, and how there was this clear boundary. Everything outside is destroyed. I would guess, I know myself, and I would guess that a lot of people don't necessarily know when they're outside of all of the digital firewalls that surround us. When are you safe? We don't really know. This is extremely important as we become more and more entangled in this digital world, because if we don't know where we're safe, how can we ever feel safe anywhere? We just don't know. Our next example is even further from a physical wall. Again, this is a physical wall. Again, it's not relevant. This is actually the wall of Harvard Yard, and it doesn't matter at all. Simply because what I'm describing here is not even a digital wall. It's a social wall or a systemic wall around academic institutions. Hold on. No band, no wall? No. Okay. The wall, and now this becomes less like a wall, right? But there's really a wall around academic institutions. Inside the academic institution, you can think, you're free to explore, you're free to play, to try, to break things, yeah? Outside of the wall, maybe not so much, but here, you're safe. That has nothing to do with the physical wall. The case that I wanted to describe here happened in Texas about a year and a half ago. There was a boy, a young boy, 14, who did an extra credit project for his electronics class, brought it into his school, wearing, of all things, an all-American NASA t-shirt, and got arrested, handcuffed, and taken to jail in his school. Now, what? Right? What? And I would claim that what happened here was because the wall was not clear or was not shored up enough. He was allowed the fear that came with him being who he was. He was a not white, Muslim, foreign boy with the name Ahmed Mohammed. He built an electronic alarm clock. Now, this alarm clock was the kind that sat beside everybody's bedside table until our iPhones replaced them. But this boy because of who he was, because he was not a white Texan named Andy Smith, was arrested in handcuffs and taken away. How can that happen within the safe space? How can you experiment inside of the beautiful academic space if you can't even trust that this sort of thing isn't going to happen? This is a wall that is not a stupid wall. This is an important wall, and it's fear that broke down this wall. So, another example of a wall, now maybe a different one and an interesting one, not digital. This last example gives a little bit of hope. We have a wall which doesn't look at all like a wall. In fact, it's the most beautiful wall, the kind of wall that you want to see happen. I am not apologist for walls, no ban, no wall. But this wall, in this case, was a really interesting situation. A CEO of a technology company, a famous one, was interested in building an economy, an industry, around green cars, so electric cars. Voiture. And I know. So what he realized, there's a part of this that's very important where all technology companies, all energy companies, basically everybody that deals in technology has a huge wall of intellectual property. All healthcare companies, and just everybody has this wall of patents. And then behind the patents you have your lawyers, and they're armed to the teeth with everything that you can think of, and they battle each other like armies. This is a constant thing that's going on in Silicon Valley. This is a constant thing that's going across technology. This CEO did an absolutely fascinating thing. Even in the midst of this situation, where there's so much fear, there's armies entrenched, and battles going on, you've got this, what's actually called a landscape, and you've got your boundaries, and it's a war around intellectual property. He took the whole thing and he turned it on its head. In a very sweet post involving cats and video games, he released all of his patents into the internet and said, everybody, use these. Take my patents, they're free for you. Which is crazy. Everybody else in the industry is doing the opposite. They're fighting tooth and nail and battling for the value of these things, and he says, it's free, please use. The genius of this move for him was that he realized he needed to build an ecosystem. He needed the diversity of ideas of everybody coming and building on his stuff. He couldn't do it alone. He couldn't build an entire industry. And so he invited everyone in to use his patents, and then in that way there was a community. And so the reason that I have this picture is because this is a community garden in New York. Everybody has thrown their plants in there. You can see it's an absolute raging mesh, but it's lush, it's green, it's growing, it's actually growing across the walls. You end up with this lovely ecosystem and possibility because of the power of all of these people and all of this interaction and all of this fertile space. So here's somebody who, in the midst of maximum fear, in the middle of a war around intellectual property, was able to take the thing, look at it, think innovatively about it, and say, no, we can do this completely differently. Pretty cool. This is actually, there's an aside now back to our no ban, no wall, where this particular CEO is actually one of the advisors to the government. So maybe he can apply some of the same thinking to the current situation. We can only hope. So look, even before the events of this week, it was a strange and distressing and tumultuous, violent, really, topic to come here and talk about walls in a session that's all about thinking outside of the box and innovation. But being the scientist I am, looking at the strategies I do, I would claim that there's an awful lot of action at these boundaries, at these walls. And if we take a moment, or while you're thinking about everything else you think about in your systems, think about the boundaries, and think about the way the interactions between insides and outsides work, because there's a lot of action there. Thank you, guys.